So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have CMMC Recovery Domain Backups and Disasters with Brandon Flittner. So we appreciate everyone joining us today. So just some general introductions, housekeeping items. I will be your host today. Again, my name is Aaron Troschnetz and I'm the General Manager for North America Smithers Quality Assessments. For everyone's awareness, the chat has been disabled. We do have the Q&A button to submit any questions. We will be monitoring that and taking a period of Q&A at the very end. So after you exit the webinar, we will be sending a brief survey. These surveys help us a great deal in terms of planning additional future content. So we would appreciate any feedback you might have. So let's introduce our speaker today. So our speaker today, Brandon Flittner, is an information security consultant for Perseus Information Security Consulting. Brandon is also a full stack application developer with over 10 years of experience in IT and system administration. Brandon spends his professional time performing on-site network installations, upgrades, and so forth, as well as performing gap analysis activities, specifically in CMMC, and drafting and implementing any necessary system security plans. So with that, I will hand it off to Brandon.
Alrighty, let's get my share going up. Alrighty, so as Aaron mentioned, my name is Brandon Flittner and I'm a security consultant for Perseus Information Security Consulting in Tampa, Florida. We help small manufacturers navigate their way through the CMMC and NIST 800-171 pathway to compliance. In today's webinar, we're going to cover the CMMC recovery domain and its related items. The purpose of today's discussion is to increase your awareness regarding disaster recovery as it pertains to the CMMC. So in order to get to our main point, we will briefly review information security risk assessment. We'll also discuss the CMMC requirements and associations with other domains. We'll go over business impact analysis, the recovery time objective, RTO, and recovery point objective, RPO, system resilience and fault tolerance, data classification as it pertains to the CMMC, data breaches and their costs, duties and responsibilities as it pertains to the recovery domain, and finally, identifying your best backup solution based on your needs. Just a side note, I won't be discussing any specific products in the webinar as it is out of the scope of the discussion. With that being said, we do help our customers with this all the time, and my contact information is at the end of this presentation. I do want to jump back here. We're partnered with Smithers in their CMMC venture. As you can see, we're listed on their website. That's Bill Nelson is our business development lead here in Tampa, Florida. So CMMC requirements and relationships with other domains. So if you do have any questions about backup, save it for the Q&A or feel free to email me. It'll be in the, my contact information will be at the end. So as you can see on the screen, the recovery domain has many relationships with other domains. Some of these associations are not as apparent as others. So we have incident response, awareness and training, systems and communication protection, audit and accountability, access control, systems and communication protection again, and security assessment, media protection. So all of these domains kind of touch the recovery domain in some aspect or another. You can see here that I've actually listed out some of those that I've stated. Beyond the standard recovery domain, you have your incident response. It does have a recovery component in there. Awareness and training, just ensuring that your personnel are trained to carry out the backup duties. Systems and communication protection, protecting the confidentiality of CUI at rest. Confidentiality of CUI at rest, that would apply to your backups as well. Audit and accountability. A lot of people probably don't think about this, but your backup solutions do create logs, and those logs can be collected into a central repository. separating the duties of individuals to reduce the risk of malevolent activity without collusion, ensuring that managers, system administrators, and all users are made aware of all the security risks. Employee FIPS validated cryptography. This is important because your backups have to be encrypted as well, and they have to be FIPS validated. So you also want to periodically assess the security controls in the organizational system. So how that applies to recovery is you want to check that your backups are actually backing up and they're working. You want to test your backups. Again, in the security assessment domain, monitor security controls on an ongoing basis. That kind of piggybacks on the previous one. You want to make sure your backups are running as scheduled. Media protection, protect system media containing federal contract information, both paper and digital, applies to backups, so on and so forth. So let's jump over to information security risk assessments. We're going to assume that our audience is aware of the two common types of risk categories, natural and human initiated. Examples of natural risks are events such as hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and fires. Theft, arson, fraud, terrorism, or even a Chinese rocket falling out of the sky are examples of human-initiated incidents. And there are even less serious events such as human error, staff strikes. So when it comes to evaluating each form of risk, every approach should focus on the common sense approach, which might seem self-evident, but refers to making sure that you think about the obvious first. So when it comes to natural risks, for an example, an organization located on the coast is much more likely to be hit by a hurricane than one located thousands of miles into the country's interior. When it comes to human initiated risks, an organization such as a bank or some type of financial institution is much more likely to be hacked than, say, a construction company. So while any company will face certain risks, other risks are obviously much more depending on the nature of the organization. As a result, prioritizing certain risks should always start with the obvious. So based on the risk evaluation and recognition of which threats pose the greatest to your company or organization, you should decide who will be the most impacted if an incident occurs. Data loss, personnel loss, loss of functionality, loss of information, and denial of access are the 5 major types of consequences that can occur as a result of any given risk event, or any of these can occur to varying degrees in any type of risk event. So when assessing risk, you must come up with a methodology and an acceptable level of risk that you are willing to take. In this example, we're going to use the simple formula of probability times consequences equals risk. If each variable is on a scale of 1 to 4, and you have identified that the calculated risk score of 3 or higher is unacceptable and must be treated, then you must do so. If the risk score of an activity is only a 2, your organization may be willing to take on that risk. So in this section, we'll briefly go over how we can conduct a business impact analysis. This is a process of determining which resources are most important to your company and any security flaws that could jeopardize those assets. I'm not going to cover all the points of a business impact analysis. I'm just going to drill down onto what is required for the CMMC and show you what an auditor is going to be looking for. Across different standards, the business impact analysis is generally standardized. In general, a business impact analysis often entails attempting to assess the probability of any given hazard occurring. So in short, a business impact analysis is proactive planning. One major outcome of the assessment is for employees or employers to learn their roles and responsibilities as it relates to dealing with negative security incidents. So when conducting a business impact analysis, there are usually 2 primary factors or methods to the study, which are quantitative and qualitative, respectively. With the quantitative focusing on the monetary value in terms of how much it would cost if resource X was lost or damaged, while the qualitative approach focuses on factors such as the impact of your credibility or consumer trust, investor relations, or retaining workforce cohesion, the quantitative approach focuses on the impact of your reputation or customer confidence. Qualitative measures are, of course, more difficult to pin down, but they can also be much more influential in the long term than quantitative considerations. For example, if you consider missing hardware or a physical structure that is collapsed, there will undoubtedly be a monetary cost. However, if you were able to quickly resolve the problem or use some kind of contingency system or continuity to continue to provide services, it would have not had any impact on your customer base. Now, let's talk about the cloud for a second, because everybody thinks that the cloud is resilient to failure. So although cloud providers have typically, have reliable services, they're not resistant to failure. As a result, if their service fails, it will have a direct impact on your operations. So this is another risk to consider in your study. The next step is to try to determine the likelihood of any given occurrence occurring, along with an estimation of how you believe it would happen, or how much you would believe it would happen. To put it another way, the likelihood itself is a bit more binary. It's almost as if the question is, does this happen, yes or no? Then there's frequency, which is, if it does happen, how much could it happen? Using the weather as an example, based on the geographical area, the frequency can be measured with much greater precision in a probability assessment. So in summary, try to come up with a list of threats that can be dealt with as quickly as possible. However, even if you have the security controls in place, danger is still present and continuous vigilance is required. This will help to lower the overall risk. Your business impact analysis will help you identify your recovery point objective and recovery time objective, which will be covered in the next section. So RTO versus RPO, recovery time objective versus recovery point objective. These are two values that are correlated with recovering from a loss. So internally, they're used for the benefit of your own users. However, they can help to ease fears about losses by letting users know that recoveries aren't left up to chance. So in terms of definition, the RTO value, or recovery time objective, refers to time and simply expresses an estimated amount of downtime based on what is considered tolerable. To put it another way, how long can you afford to be out of business? In certain instances, there isn't a single attribute that can cover all your circumstances. So when you get audited for your CMMC level 3 and up certification, the auditor is going to be looking through your written backup policies and procedures and will determine whether or not your organization has defined an RTO and an RPO. This is why these terms are very important. If an entire data center goes offline due to a fire or other natural disaster, it would undoubtedly take much longer to restore the service. But the idea is that you'll probably have a variety of RTO values for a variety of circumstances. A recovery point objective, on the other hand, is concerned with the point in time from which the recovery should be stopped. So it corresponds to an appropriate amount of data to lose. The first thought that comes to mind after hearing this argument is that no data loss is appropriate, but this isn't always the case. The RTO value should represent the needs of the company in terms of how long you can survive with your services interrupted. However, RPO isn't only concerned with the validity of your data. RPO is concerned with the validity of your data, not its length. The RPO, on the other hand, will specify what type of backup plan to use. The RTO, which determines how long you will continue to function during a service interruption, is generally correlated with the cost. As a result, something outside of the RTO may be financially detrimental to the company. RPO values are usually simpler to calculate because they concentrate solely on the data. When it comes to measuring RTO, there are many other variables to consider, making it much more difficult to decide. All things considered, any disaster recovery plan should include RTO and RPO values for as many different scenarios as you could believe that could be relevant to your organization. This will allow you to create a cost-effective solution that is comprehensive enough to ensure that your business's survival during failures and allowing you to restart operations as quickly as possible while minimizing data loss. So I'm going to pause for just a minute. And if you're watching and listening to this and you feel like you're in the deep end of the pool, that's okay. We help businesses through this process every day. There are cost-effective, simple, and elegant solutions available. So let's continue to walk through this presentation a little more. So one more thing about the RTO and RPO, these can vary based on the type of business that you have. A bank, for example, could have a much shorter window that they're depending on versus a manufacturer. So let's talk about system resilience and fault tolerance. We'll look at the principles of system resilience and fault tolerance in this section, as well as how a few examples of how to make your systems more stable overall. First off, you should identify your single points of failures. These are any single components that will bring the whole system down if it were to fail. Obviously, these could be detrimental to your operations. System resilience and fault tolerance. System resiliency refers to the data on the information system as a whole remaining available to an extent in the event of a hardware failure, and where fault tolerance focuses on a specific component, specifically the redundancy of that specific component. So redundancy, many MRP or ERP systems will allow you to configure your servers as a cluster. This can also be referred to as a failover cluster. So pretend you have 3 servers. Now, consider the fact that all of these servers mirror your ERP system. In a disaster scenario, if one of the servers were to fail, the other 2 servers would still be available because they are clustered together. Now, this might be a little over your head if you're not technical, and that's okay, but your IT guy will know what this is. RAID is a configuration where multiple hard drives are used and the data is written across all disks. Simply put, depending on your RAID configuration, if one of the disks were to fail, the system would be able to recover the data from the other disks. If you're familiar with RAID and have the opportunity to implement this into your system, I strongly recommend RAID 10. Once again, if you're not technical, just remember the term RAID, just like the bug killer, but it does the opposite, and tell your IT guy. He or she will be able to guide you in the right direction. And once again, if you're still lost, my contact information is available at the end of this presentation. So we're going to touch on data classification. We'll look at some of the various types of data classifications that you may be storing in your company. And it's not so much a question of whether it should be backed up in this situation. We'll assume that all information should be backed up. However, you should also remember that the data is stored in the first place. I'm sorry. You should also remember how the data is stored in the first place, as well as how the backups are held. So one major question that people have is, what is CUI, or is this considered CUI? I want to direct you over to Smither's previous webinar with Devin Casey covering this topic, as Devin was the head of the CUI program. It was fantastic, and I'm sure it will answer a lot of your questions. Notwithstanding, if you're in the DIB, my best answer to this question is to refer you to your DD-254s. It lays pretty much everything out. So for an example, let's consider the need of storing CUI on your server. You should certainly guarantee that the integrity of the original data remains the same on the hard drive of the server if you need to store the CUI. This is your responsibility. You may also create backups by copying the data to an encrypted USB flash drive and storing it in a locked safe. On the other hand, if the server was in an easily accessible location and you simply toss the flash drives into a box labeled backups of sensitive information and left it on a desk somewhere out in the open, this is obviously not a very safe method of protecting the material. So when working with sensitive data such as CUI, you'll have to mark it as such. There's other classifications such as proprietary or protected, and these classifications translate into how the data is handled, both in terms of original storage and backups. When it comes to classified data, however, there are varying regulations in place as specified by some kind of governing body that tell you how this data should be treated. In our case, this could be ITAR, DFARS, NIST 800-171, CMMC, or other regulations regarding data sovereignty. So one type of sensitive information, and I'm sorry if I confuse you on the screen with private and proprietary, is personally identifiable information, or PII for short. This is basically any information that can be used to identify an individual, such as a driver's license, a passport, social security number, or a social insurance number. It's all considered PII. If your product to the government is people, then there's probably a high probability that the PII of your employees will be considered CUI. So keep that in mind. PII is described as something that contains personally identifiable information about an individual. So if you share this information with another organization, it is their responsibility to make sure that it is kept safely and not shared with somebody who isn't allowed to see it. Of course, if an intruder obtains this information, it may lead to identity theft. And in many situations, any company that must collect and store PII must do so not only for their clients, but also for their own employees. It is important to know that not all data that you process or create is yours. In the DIB space, we are often creating CUI on behalf of the government, so they have the final decision on how the data should be stored and processed. Again, for those in the DIB, refer to your DD-254s. If you completely own all of the data and are the only one responsible for its security, you have a lot more control. So another data classification as well as public. These can be documents that you provide to your vendors, clients, marketing material, collateral, whatever you want to call it. It would be classified as public information. So we'll talk about data breaches a little bit and the costs of data breaches. In this section, we'll look at the effect of or harm that a data breach may cause, which is described as a security incident in which information is accessed or transmitted by somebody who isn't authorized to. So that's the plain, simple definition of a data breach. Unauthorized attempts to gain access to information that can be beneficial to others are likely to occur as long as that information persists. So in most situations, when it comes to the possible effect or harm that a breach may cause, it is often financial. Of course, this is the main motive for most attacks, but it is far from the only one. In certain instances, an assault is carried out by a disgruntled employee or somebody who has been fired, in which they could be more concerned with harming the company's credibility if the perpetrator, for example, is able to break their defenses and make this private information public. So how did attackers get access to this password protected data in the first place? Well, there's a variety of attack vectors, including established system flaws that professional attackers can exploit. Weak passwords that can be quickly guessed or found using other methods, such as dictionary or brute force attacks, in which scripts are run to try a large number of possible password combinations. Your user's unintentional downloads of viruses or other malware, or a malware attack directed at a particular device. Maybe a social engineering assault and where the intruder impersonates a trustworthy user, such as an administrator, to trick users into disclosing a password or PIN numbers by claiming that their current credentials have expired or have been compromised. These are all very common. And they must supply the information to that person to prove that they are the legitimate individual. These are tactics used every day to gain access to information systems. So on a personal level, some defensive measures to secure PII or CUI includes using strong passwords that are extremely difficult to guess. Any website that needs personal information should be entered using protected HTTP or HTTPS. Keeping a close eye on your bank accounts and or credit card receipts for purchases you didn't make, and of course, downloading anti-malware software on your computers. Both physical and virtual security controls should be tightened up as much as possible at the organizational level. This process is known as hardening. Security guards, closed server rooms, and the use of smart cards to gain entry to these restricted areas are examples of physical security. Firewalls, network security systems, removing unused functionality or programs, installing managed anti-malware software or endpoint protection, and the use of administrative positions are all examples of virtualization. Let me back up. Those are all examples of security controls. If a violation occurs, you can take immediate action such as shutting down your systems and notifying your customers. Educating the employees about the policies and procedures in place in the company will help to prevent social engineering attacks. Users should be told, for example, that an administrator would never request their username or password via email, even though they need to be reset legitimately. Of course, file permissions can be used to limit sensitive data access or access to the sensitive data to only users who have a valid need for it. Unfortunately, as previously mentioned, this is an ongoing fight that necessitates constant attention. But in almost every situation, the cost of a data breach outweighs the cost of maintaining protection. So let's discuss duties and responsibilities. We'll go through the duties and responsibilities that should be established and performed as any part of backup plan in this section. Firstly, you'll want to identify the data owner. This will help guide the development of your backup plan, as they can let you know how important the data is. Also very good for helping you determine the RTO and RPO values. So let's talk about duties. Generally, your system administrator will handle all of your backup requirements, but there's sometimes a designated backup administrator role as well. So while this is something that usually is more common to larger organizations, I should point out that it is not exclusive to them. It can be done in smaller businesses as well. So just a note, you don't have to hire a backup administrator to fulfill the CMMC requirements. More than likely, you will be the backup administrator. So the backup administrators will assist in determining the value of the data and the frequency at which backups will be needed, as well as any required data retention duration for the backups themselves. After you've gathered the information, you can put in the necessary safeguards. So as a result, in most organizations, the responsibility for configuring and conducting backups will fall to a system administrator of some kind, maintaining the systems and software needed to conduct the backups, validating that the backup jobs are effective, and checking the backups to ensure that the data can be retrieved are all common tasks. And of course, performing the restorations if and when they are needed. Apart from that, their duties can even include updates or even recommendations on emerging technology or programs that may better suit the organization's needs. In such situations, a higher level system administrator would still be involved, but they could not manage the day-to-day activities as well as the backup administrator. The more work that you put into identifying basic roles and obligations, regardless of your implementation, the easier it will be to maintain and protect your data against loss. So we'll touch on training and awareness here. This is really a pretty self-explanatory section, but it still is good to correlate it with the other domains, especially the recovery domain. We'll look at several factors to consider when preparing staff who will be participating in disaster recovery at all levels. Of course, this is the essence. Of course, the essence of this will vary depending on the position. So understanding the disaster recovery process, on the other hand, should not be limited to system managers or data stewards. It should be known by everybody in the organization. All employees in the company should have a basic understanding of the overall security measures in place, as well as the fundamental approaches that have been put in place to prevent disasters in the first place. To that end, preparation should include a variety of components, starting with orientation for any new hires or contractors involved. Then there's the initial training, which lays out the duties, obligations, and procedures that will be in place. Refresher training is then given on a regular basis, particularly when a change is made. Brief awareness training, which normally applies to end users to simply keep them informed of how data and resources are secured and what steps must be taken to recover them in the event of a breach. It all boils down to good communication in the end. The execution and continuing management of your business continuity plan will go much more smoothly if everybody knows what needs to be done and how to do it. So let's talk about backup solutions based on your needs. And as I mentioned, we're not going to mention any backup solution in particular, except for Borg, any Linux people, just kidding. But so a couple considerations that you want to ask yourself. So backup solutions do come in all shapes and sizes. They run on different platforms. They can either run on a server, they can run in the cloud, they can run on your own computer. So do you want to store your data on premises or off premises? How many employees do you have? How many computers and endpoints do you have? How many servers do you have? How many virtual machines do you have? Those questions would all kind of tie together, because that really boils down to the cost, because a lot of these backup solutions are licensed per seat or per user or per endpoint. That's usually the most common way. Do you have a plan for offsite backup? Is Microsoft 365 email part of your backup plan? I mentioned I'm not going to talk about specific backup solutions, but I can talk about AWS GovCloud. So right now, I'll tell you about the secret gold rush. If you sign up for an AWS account and you enter your credit card information and you click My Account, you can actually sign up for a GovCloud account without going through the entire Amazon vetting process. I was sent this link by an Amazon employee. It's been working out great, but that is a secure place where you can offload your offsite backups and will be CMMC compliant. You also want to consider, is Microsoft 365 email part of your backup plan? A lot of people think that Microsoft 365 email is backed up automatically, but it is not. So basically, just a couple common data backup questions. What's the difference between incremental, differential, and a full backup? So incremental is, sections at a time, one day, the next day, following day. Differential is just what has changed, and a full backup is, as it implies, a full backup. Do I need a server to perform backups? Yes and no. Typically, if you have multiple endpoints or file shares, you'll want to have a dedicated server for your backups. But if you're just a one-man shop, you can definitely run the backup software on your own computer. Can I store my backups in the cloud? That depends. Depends on the data sovereignty requirements. Once again, for those in the div, refer to your DD-254s. How can I recover from backups? So all backup solutions come with a recovery tool. That's either a bootable USB, or you boot from the network and you are able to retrieve your backups either locally from a disk or from the cloud or somewhere else on the network. What is a mirror backup? Mirror backup is basically just a mirror, as it implies. It's a mirror image of the same file. So if you were to delete a file in the master, it's going to mirror in the backup. It's going to delete. Is file history the same as a full image backup? No, file history is a Windows feature where a full image backup is an actual system image copy. How many backups should I keep? A good rule of thumb is at least 3, but this really depends on the needs of your organization. So in summary, we've looked at how to prepare for a business continuity and disaster recovery, including both business impact and risk assessments. This was accomplished by looking at device resilience, fault tolerance, and data backup options, identification and classification of data, the cost of data breach, conducting a business impact analysis again, and conducting a risk assessment, continuity planning, and data security solutions that are available. In terms of data backups and recoveries, the functions and duties of a system administrator and backup administrator, RTO and RPO, that stand for recovery time objectives and recovery point objective, respectively, and what to include in a disaster recovery training plan and how to prepare one. And with that, I will kick it back to Aaron.
Okay, thank you very much, Brandon. That was excellent. We do appreciate that. Some really good information. So before we go into wrap up, we'll handle any questions or comments. Scott, do you want to handle maybe what we've collected?
Sure. Yeah, and just a reminder, like you see on your screen there is a Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to use that to enter any questions. You can even enter them anonymously if you'd like. We'd be happy to use this time here at the end of the presentation to go through those. So we do have a couple that are in there now. And the first one, Brandon, is I have been backing up our data on a small portable hard drive once a week, but it's not been encrypted. How do I go back and encrypt that data?
Okay, so a couple of options. I'm not sure what backup solution you're using. My best advice would be to start from scratch. In a perfect world scenario, you would buy a replacement hard drive, keep that backup hard drive, don't erase it, and then start a new version of your encrypted backups. You can lock the drive with BitLocker. You can encrypt it with BitLocker rather. But most backup solutions will have that encryption feature built in. One of them in particular, I believe you can even apply the encryption afterwards. You have to take a full backup. It can't be an incremental backup.
Great, thank you. Next question. How often should I back up everything?
Every day. Every day. So whenever I configure backup solutions for clients, I set a daily job, especially for file shares at night once all of the employees have left. I also have it perform file integrity checking. just making sure that the backup is full and complete. So you want to back up as frequently as possible. And I should mention that, larger organizations such as banks take backups every minute. So there really is no limit on how often you want to back up. If you just finished working on a long proposal and you don't want to lose it, there's no harm in initiating your backup process.
So great, thank you. One other question that came up through the presentation a little bit earlier on. You mentioned some examples of items that auditors would be looking for if you were pursuing a level 3 certification. How would that change if it was a level 1 or a level 2?
So with level 1 and level 2, well, I guess we'll stick with level 1. There's less requirements. The level 3 has a lot more requirements that do touch that recovery domain. Let me pull up my slides here. So most of the requirements that do touch on the well, I'll go back and I'll say that there's quite a few that are level 2. So, if you are assessing your organization at level 2, you definitely want to review these. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Were you sharing something there, Brandon?
No. I was just going back.
That's fine. No worries. That is all the questions that we have, unless somebody has one they want to throw in there. Oh, another one came in. The company has an IT company that handles all of this for us.
Okay.
How can we ensure that the proper processes are being done? For example, encryption.
So, Victoria, if there's any way that you can, if you have access to the backups themselves, if you're able to open the files and just get into it as normal, then obviously they're not encrypted. If your IT company is actually storing them off site, you're going to have to work with them a little more. You would need to get in contact with them. I would actually request proof that there is encryption, but also when you encrypt files and you set up a backup that is encrypted, you set a password. And typically you don't want to lose that password because it's pretty much not recoverable. And when I mean not recoverable, I mean not recoverable. So, there would have been a password that was set up originally, and you should have this. I would think that your IT company would give that to you. So it's definitely something to ask them.
Thank you. It doesn't appear there's any other further questions. So if there aren't, I guess we can proceed to the wrap up, Aaron.
Okay, very good. Once again, Brandon, thank you very much. Appreciate the time for those particular questions. So as we mentioned in the beginning, we will be making this presentation available on www.smithers.com. So everyone that was able to register, you will be notified via email once the video is available. For any answers to additional questions, we do plan to make those available soon. So if we have any that trickle in after the session, we will certainly share those with all the participants. And again, when this webinar ends, you will be directed to a brief survey. Please, if you could take a few moments to fill that out. We get a lot of great feedback from the survey activity. And again, some ideas on what might be helpful with future webinar content. And lastly, thank you for joining us, and we hope everyone has a great day.